The sky above the frozen planet was a swirl of pale blues and harsh whites, a storm moving with quiet, relentless power. Dr. Elias Kane gripped the controls of his small exploration craft, his eyes scanning the readouts as the wind shook the ship. The planet was remote, almost forgotten, a place where only the bravest or the most desperate dared to go. He had received the faintest life signal days ago, a signal barely holding on against the icy winds and magnetic storms that swept across the surface. It had called to him, a challenge, and he had answered without hesitation. The craft shuddered as a gust of icy air hit it, and Elias adjusted the stabilizers with careful precision. He had flown through dangerous weather before, but nothing like this. The surface of the planet stretched endlessly below him, a frozen wasteland broken only by jagged ice cliffs and deep crevasses. The signal was weak but steady now, flickering in rhythm with something alive, something breathing. He took a deep breath and muttered to himself, "Whatever it is, it needs help." A massive figure barely moving, half buried in snow. The outline of wings, or something that looked like wings, was broken, twisted, and frozen in place. Something alive was inside, and its energy signature was weak, flickering like a dying star. Elias' heart beat faster. He had seen injured alien life before, but nothing of this scale. The readings were unusual, unfamiliar. His fingers flew across the controls as he landed the craft on a relatively flat surface near the figure. Snow gusted over the ship, coating the windshield and threatening to obscure his view, but he focused. Opening the hatch, the cold hit him like a physical blow. The wind sliced through the thick thermal suit he wore, making every movement difficult. But Elias did not hesitate. He grabbed his emergency medical kit, checking the tools he had prepared for this mission. Alien physiology was unpredictable, but he had trained for improvisation. As he approached, he finally saw the face, or at least the head. It was regal and imposing, larger than any human's, with features that were sharp and striking, and eyes that were closed as if in pain. The creature had scales, iridescent and shimmering faintly under the storm's dim light, but they were dulled and cracked with frost. Something about the figure radiated authority, even in weakness. Elias' instincts screamed at him. This was no ordinary alien. "Easy, I'm here to help," he whispered, though he knew she might not even hear. He crouched beside the figure and scanned her body. The injuries were severe. Frostbite-covered extremities, the wings or appendages were fractured, and her breathing was shallow, irregular. Even through the thick scales, he could feel the heat of life fading. This was a being on the edge of death, and time was not on their side. Elias unstrapped a portable warming device from his kit, setting it carefully near her body, hoping to stabilize her core temperature. Then he carefully began to check for other injuries. The ribcage area felt fragile, as if broken in several places, and there were deep lacerations on the limbs. He adjusted his sensors and medical scanners to alien biology mode, running a quick diagnostic. The results flashed in green and red, the red areas marking severe trauma. He froze for a moment, looking at her face. Even though her eyes were closed, her presence was commanding. It was a queenly presence, unmistakable. She had the air of someone who had ruled or led, someone who carried responsibility heavier than any human could imagine. And now she was abandoned here, left to die alone. A pang of anger rose in him. Who would abandon a living being in a place like this? And yet there was no time to dwell. Survival came first. Carefully, he began to remove the snow covering her body, brushing it off in chunks. Every movement had to be gentle. One wrong motion could break a bone or worsen an injury. He hummed quietly to himself, a habit he had developed to focus. As he worked, the alien shifted slightly, a barely perceptible twitch. Elias held his breath. It was a sign that she was still alive. That small motion gave him renewed energy, and he worked faster, more carefully. By the time he had cleared enough snow, he could see her entire torso and head. Her scales glimmered faintly despite the frost, and there was a faint pulse he could detect with the scanner. He sighed in relief. She was alive, just barely, but alive. That was all that mattered. Elias began the process of administering emergency treatment. He applied warming gels, carefully wrapped her in thermal blankets, and injected stabilizing fluids through specially adapted syringes. Alien anatomy was a challenge, but he had studied patterns of similar species in medical archives. The injections were delicate, precise, and necessary. Each one seemed to give her a little more strength. Her breathing grew steadier, though it was still weak and uneven. Then he heard it, a low, resonating sound. It wasn't a language he could understand, not at first. It was more a vibration, a wave of emotion that struck him in the chest. He froze, listening. The alien's mind reached out not with words but with feelings and fragments of images. Fear, confusion, pain, loneliness, and something like gratitude. Elias swallowed hard. He had trained for alien communication, but nothing prepared him for this. He focused, willing himself to stay calm. "I'm here. I won't leave you," he said softly, hoping the words would reach her mind in some way. He did not know if she understood his voice, but the resonance seemed to calm her, if only slightly. The wind howled outside, rattling the ship and threatening to bury them both again in snow. Elias worked tirelessly, knowing that the storm would not wait. He dug a shallow trench in the snow and moved the alien queen into it, using every ounce of his strength to lift her, support her body, and protect her from the freezing wind. The trench would give them some shelter from the worst of the blizzard. Once she was settled, he activated a portable shield that emitted heat and deflected the worst of the storm. It hummed softly, a tiny oasis of warmth in the endless cold. He checked her pulse again, stronger, still weak but improving. His hands were numb, his body trembling, but he ignored it. She needed him more. He glanced at the sensors and saw faint signs of life from other areas nearby, creature tracks, small signals of movement, but nothing that seemed dangerous. Still, he remained vigilant. The planet was unforgiving. One mistake, 1 second of inattention, and they could both be lost. Hours passed. Elias remained beside her, adjusting treatments, monitoring vitals, and speaking to her softly. Occasionally, she stirred, and the subtle movements of her massive wings or limbs required him to act with lightning speed. Each time she responded, even slightly, it fueled his determination. He refused to let exhaustion claim him. At one point, she opened her eyes. They were large, radiant, and intelligent, and for a moment Elias felt a wave of awe. They seemed to pierce through him, seeing not just a human, but a being capable of choice, courage, and compassion. She did not speak, but a wave of recognition passed through him, as if she knew he was there to help. It was the first acknowledgement of trust he had received, and it sent shivers down his spine. By late night, the storm had not subsided, but the Queen's condition was stable enough that he could plan the next step. He knew this was not enough. She could not survive here for long. The planet was too hostile, the environment too extreme. He would have to move her somehow to a safer place, a medical station orbiting the planet, or even a distant human settlement. But first, they needed rest, warmth, and stabilization. Elias sat beside her, wrapped in his thermal suit, sharing what little body heat he could spare. He watched the snow swirl around them, the blizzard painting the world in shades of white and gray. And as he watched, he felt a quiet resolve settle over him. This queen, abandoned by her own people, might see him as just a human, small and fragile, but he would show her that human courage and compassion could defy even the coldest wasteland. Hours melted into the night. The alien queen's breathing grew steadier. The faint pulse of her life signature no longer flickered wildly, but glimmered with fragile strength. Elias' own exhaustion gnawed at him, but he did not sleep. Not yet. He had promised to protect her, and he would not break that promise, not here, not now. As the first faint light of the planet's distant sun touched the horizon, Elias allowed himself a small breath. They had survived the first night. That was all that mattered. The storm had not defeated them. The wasteland had not claimed her life. And in that small, fragile victory, Elias felt the stirrings of something extraordinary, a partnership unspoken but undeniable that would change not only their fates but perhaps the fate of the galaxy itself. The frozen planet stretched before them, harsh and unyielding, but Elias felt something new. Hope. And with hope, he knew, came the possibility of survival, recovery, and something far greater than either of them could yet imagine. The blizzard continued its unrelenting assault on the frozen wasteland, howling like a chorus of lost spirits. Inside the small trench, Elias Kane worked tirelessly, checking the alien queen's vitals and adjusting the warming units. Queen Melara lay there, still weak, her massive form taking up nearly the entire space he had dug out. Her breathing had stabilized, but the frostbite and injuries were still severe. Every breath she drew seemed like a small victory against the bitter cold. Elias examined the lacerations along her limbs. Some were deep, the edges jagged and raw, as if metal had torn her scales and tissue. He cleaned them carefully, using a combination of chemical antiseptics and alien-compatible regenerative gel. The gel was designed to accelerate healing in humanoid life forms, but Elias had adapted it, combining it with a few alien medicinal compounds he had studied from field reports. It was a delicate process. One wrong mixture could have worsened her condition, yet he worked with steady hands, focusing on every detail. As he worked, Melara stirred slightly. Her eyelids flickered, and she gave a soft, almost imperceptible growl, a mixture of discomfort and instinct. Elias froze for a moment, unsure if she would resist his touch. Then, as he gently spoke to her in a calm voice, she relaxed just enough to allow him to continue. "I know it hurts," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere. I promise." This was not just another patient. This was a queen, a leader, someone whose life could change the course of her entire species. Hours passed. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside the trench, a fragile sense of calm settled. Elias managed to stabilize her temperature with the portable heaters and layers of reflective thermal blankets. He set up a small, shielded field around her that reduced heat loss and blocked the worst of the snow. But he knew this was only temporary. The queen could not survive here indefinitely. He needed to move her to get her to a safe location where advanced treatment was possible. While the stabilizers hummed, Elias noticed the queen's eyes slowly opening. They were large and sharp, a striking shade of violet with slitted pupils that adjusted to the dim light. When they met his, he felt the full weight of her presence, regal, powerful, and intelligent. Yet there was also vulnerability, fear, exhaustion, and perhaps a faint recognition. At first, the queen did not speak. Her species used a form of telepathy for communication, a method that conveyed emotions and images rather than words. Elias had trained for this in simulations, but the reality was more intense. He felt a flood of emotion, a mix of pain, confusion, and something that resembled gratitude. Her mind brushed against his own, fragile and cautious, testing the connection. Elias responded silently, focusing his thoughts on calm and reassurance. "I'm here. You're safe, at least for now," he thought. The connection pulsed gently in response, a weak but perceptible acknowledgement. It was the beginning of trust, fragile and tentative, but real. Night fell, and the blizzard showed no signs of slowing. Elias had been awake for hours, but he could not rest. Melara needed constant monitoring. Every few minutes he checked her pulse, adjusted the heating fields, and monitored the injections of stabilizing fluids. She occasionally shivered, her massive wings twitching involuntarily. He wrapped additional layers of thermal material around them, careful not to restrict her breathing or circulation. As the hours stretched, Elias began to notice the subtle signs of recovery. Her breathing grew steadier, her pulse stronger. The slight twitch of her wings became less frequent. For a moment, he allowed himself a small sigh of relief. The queen was surviving. Against all odds, she was surviving. Elias knew, however, that this was only the first step. The environment was unforgiving. The blizzard could intensify at any moment. Frostbite had already begun to set in on her extremities, and he could not fully reverse the damage here. Advanced medical facilities were the only solution. He began planning a safe path to move her, a path that avoided the jagged ice cliffs and deep crevasses. As he worked, he observed her more closely. Melara's body, though weakened, was still incredibly powerful. Her scales shimmered faintly in the dim light, reflecting the portable heater's glow. Even in her weakened state, there was an undeniable elegance, a reminder that she had once ruled an empire. Elias felt a strange mix of admiration and respect. He had saved many lives before, but none carried this weight, this history, this sense of destiny. Hours later, she began to respond in other ways. Small gestures, barely noticeable, showed recognition of his presence. She extended a clawed hand slightly, letting him know she was aware of him. Elias adjusted her blankets, spoke softly, and worked to ensure her comfort. Each time she moved, it was a careful negotiation, a delicate balance of action and patience. By dawn, the storm showed no sign of abating, but the queen's condition had improved enough for Elias to consider a move. He checked his portable navigation devices, scanning for the nearest viable location. A research station abandoned long ago but partially shielded from the elements. It was not ideal, but it was better than the open plains. With careful planning, he could lift her onto his transport sled and make the journey, though it would be perilous. Before he could act, however, a new complication arose. Small energy readings flickered nearby. Elias froze, scanning the area with enhanced sensors. There were signs of other life, small, scattered, and cautious. Perhaps scavengers, perhaps other survivors. He did not know. He could not afford confrontation, not with Melara in such a fragile state. He activated silent alarms and began to plan a cautious route around the unknown signals. Every step had to be precise. One miscalculation could cost both of them their lives. Melara stirred again, this time more strongly. Elias noticed her wings flexing, her body attempting to reposition itself. She opened her eyes fully, and for the first time she fixed him with a steady gaze. In that gaze, Elias felt something unexpected. Curiosity, a flicker of recognition that he was not just a human, not just a passerby, but someone who might matter. He focused on her vitals as he spoke softly. "We have to move soon. The storm isn't stopping, and this place isn't safe. Can you trust me to help you?" The telepathic connection pulsed gently in response, and he took it as consent. It was a fragile trust, but trust nonetheless. The process of moving her was grueling. Elias adapted his sled, adding reinforced supports to cradle her massive form. He worked carefully, ensuring that every movement minimized stress on her injuries. When he finally lifted her onto the sled, her massive wings had to fold carefully to avoid breaking the frostbitten tips. Elias moved slowly, deliberately, counting each step, balancing urgency with caution. The journey across the frozen plains was treacherous. Snowdrifts rose like walls, hiding deep fissures beneath. The wind screamed, and the visibility was almost zero. Elias used a combination of sensors, experience, and intuition to guide the sled. At times, the sled tipped dangerously, but he managed to right it each time, using careful leverage and brute force when necessary. During the journey, Melara remained mostly silent. Occasionally, images and emotions filtered through, memories of her empire, her people, the betrayal that left her stranded. Elias felt the weight of her history pressing on him, but he did not falter. He spoke softly at intervals, sharing small bits of encouragement, reminding her that they would survive this night together. Hours later, they reached a small plateau, slightly sheltered from the worst of the wind. Elias allowed himself a brief rest, tending to her again. He checked the warming units, applied additional regenerative gel to her lacerations, and monitored her breathing. She was still fragile, but she was alive, moving slowly from the brink of death back into stability. The first light of dawn began to break through the storm clouds, illuminating the endless expanse of ice. Elias looked down at the queen, her massive form almost regal in the dim glow. Against all odds, she had survived the night. Against all odds, he had protected her. And somewhere deep in the unyielding cold, a connection had formed, small, fragile, but undeniable. Elias knew that the journey was far from over. The station where they could find proper medical care was still hours away. The blizzard could intensify at any moment, and the alien queen's enemies, whoever had abandoned her, might still be nearby, tracking her energy signature. But for now, there was survival. There was hope. And for the first time in the endless cold and isolation, Elias felt a sense of purpose stronger than any fear. He would save her no matter what it took. As they prepared to continue, he adjusted the sled, securing her carefully. Melara's eyes, now more focused, met his again, and he felt that same faint recognition, that trust, strengthening slightly. It was unspoken, yet clear. They were allies now, partners in survival against impossible odds. The frozen wasteland stretched endlessly around them, a harsh and unforgiving world. But Elias Kane, human medic, had made a choice. He would fight the storm, the cold, and the unknown dangers to save this queen. And somehow he knew that in doing so, he was about to prove something extraordinary, not just to her, but to the universe itself. The wind continued to howl across the frozen plains, but Elias Kane had no choice. Melara could not stay in the shallow trench any longer. The temporary shelter they had fought to establish was fragile, exposed, and could collapse at any moment under the storm's relentless force. Elias knew that the only way to save her fully was to reach the nearby research station, a small facility partially shielded from the elements. It would provide warmth, advanced medical equipment, and a place for her to recover. He secured the last straps on the sled, ensuring that Melara's massive form would not shift during the journey. Her wings were carefully folded, covered with thermal wraps, and her claws were tucked inside protective coverings. Elias checked the warming units and life monitors one last time. Her pulse was steady, her breathing slightly deeper than before. For the first time since he had found her, he allowed himself to hope. With a deep breath, he pushed the sled forward. Each movement required effort and precision. The snow was thick, and hidden crevasses lurked beneath the surface. Elias had to move slowly, constantly scanning the path with sensors, probing the snow ahead to avoid disaster. Every few steps, the sled would tilt dangerously, and he would brace himself, digging his boots into the icy ground to regain balance. The queen remained mostly still, conserving her strength. Elias spoke softly to her during the journey, narrating small details about their surroundings, the position of the sun, and the path ahead. It was a technique he had learned while working with alien patients. Even if they could not understand his words fully, the tone of human voice often provided reassurance. Occasionally, faint images of her memories, fragments of palaces, battlefields, and lost companions, brushed his mind. Elias acknowledged them silently, careful not to disturb her rest, but he felt a growing sense of connection. Hours passed, and the storm showed no mercy. Visibility dropped to near zero as snow swirled in chaotic patterns around them. The wind pushed against the sled, threatening to knock it over. Elias braced himself against the force, his body straining with every motion. Despite the cold seeping through his thermal suit, he refused to stop. Every second counted. Each moment of hesitation could cost Melara her life. Suddenly, the sensors beeped sharply. Elias froze, scanning the area. There were signs of movement nearby, shapes that did not match the natural terrain, moving against the wind. He tensed, recognizing the possibility of hostiles. Whoever had abandoned Melara might be tracking her, and they could be dangerous. He had no weapons suitable for a direct confrontation, but he had his intelligence, his agility, and the element of the environment on his side. He slowed the sled, pressing himself and Melara as low as possible. The figures moved cautiously, almost ghost-like, slipping through the snow. Elias adjusted the sensors to track their patterns. They were scavengers or soldiers, likely from the same faction that had betrayed Melara. Their presence confirmed one of his fears. Her enemies were still out there. Elias considered his options. Confrontation was too dangerous. Melara could not fight, and any misstep could leave them both exposed. He would have to use strategy, using the terrain to his advantage. The snow-covered ridges could conceal their path, and narrow ice cliffs could serve as natural barriers. He took a deep breath, focused, and began guiding the sled along a more concealed route, zigzagging to avoid detection. The figures followed for a while, but the storm worked in Elias' favor. Snow drifted across their tracks, hiding the trail. Gusts of wind created temporary walls of ice, allowing him to maneuver the sled without being seen. He whispered to Melara, "Stay calm, we'll get through this." She gave a faint flicker of acknowledgement, a subtle pulse of mental energy that reassured him. Hours stretched into what felt like a day. Elias pushed his body to the limit, muscles aching from the constant strain, lungs burning from the cold. Yet he refused to give in. The Queen depended on him, and he would not fail. Finally, he spotted a faint outline in the distance, the research station. It was partially buried under snow, its once bright surface dulled by years of abandonment. Still, it was a shelter, a place of safety. The final approach was treacherous. Deep snowdrifts threatened to swallow the sled, and hidden cracks in the ice could trap it. Elias moved with precision, carefully testing each step with a probe before advancing. He adjusted the sled's supports, distributing Melara's weight to prevent tipping. Every moment required concentration, every step demanded focus. When he finally reached the entrance to the station, Elias allowed himself a brief sigh of relief. They were safe, at least for now. He activated the entrance panels, melting the snow and forcing the doors open. The interior was dark, but the structure was intact, a testament to the durability of alien engineering. He guided the sled inside, careful to keep it level as he moved through the narrow corridors. Once inside, Elias activated emergency lights and heating units. The warmth spread quickly, pushing back the biting cold that had threatened to claim Melara's life. He carefully laid her down on a reinforced medical bed he had found, still wrapped in thermal blankets. Her pulse was steady, and her breathing was deep and even. For the first time in days, Elias felt a sense of accomplishment, though he knew their journey was far from over. Melara stirred slightly, opening her eyes. They were still tired, but she focused on him. In that moment, Elias felt a profound connection, a silent understanding passing between them. She had been abandoned, betrayed by her own people, yet here she was, alive because of him. And he understood that this bond, fragile as it was, could shape the future. As she rested, Elias began exploring the station for supplies. He found preserved rations, emergency medical equipment, and a small generator capable of powering life support systems. He worked quickly, setting up a secure area where Melara could continue to recover. The storm outside showed no sign of slowing, but inside, warmth and stability were returning. While he worked, he noticed subtle changes in her energy. The pulse of life that had been weak and flickering when he found her was now steady, stronger with every passing hour. He smiled faintly. Her recovery was slow, but she was healing. And with healing came the possibility of communication, of understanding, of planning their next move. Elias spoke softly as he worked, narrating the steps he took and the plans he made. Though Melara could not fully respond, he could sense her awareness, her focus, the growing trust. She was intelligent, far beyond human comprehension in many ways, and yet she relied on him. That reliance was not weakness. It was acknowledgement of his skill, his courage, his commitment. As night fell once more on the frozen planet, Elias checked her vitals again. Her pulse was steady, her body warmer, her breathing calm. He allowed himself a short rest, leaning against the wall, but he remained alert. Outside, the storm continued to rage, and the threat of hostile forces lingered. But inside, they had a fragile haven, a place where survival was possible. For the first time, Elias reflected on the journey so far. He had flown to a frozen wasteland, found a dying queen, and kept her alive through sheer determination and skill. He had battled the storm, the cold, and the unknown dangers of the planet. And in doing so, he had discovered something extraordinary: the resilience of life, the power of trust, and the unexpected strength of humanity. He glanced at Melara, lying still but alive. The queen had endured betrayal, abandonment, and near death, yet here she was, surviving against all odds. And he had been part of that survival. It was a bond formed not by shared language or culture, but by necessity, courage, and care. Elias knew that the next steps would be even more dangerous. They could not remain in the station indefinitely. Supplies were limited, the storm could worsen, and hostile forces might still track them. But for now, there was hope. And hope in the frozen wasteland was more powerful than any weapon. As he settled into a vigil by her side, Elias made a silent promise. He would protect her, guide her, and ensure she survived. Not because of duty alone, but because he understood the value of life, the weight of trust, and the extraordinary potential of humanity to rise in the face of impossible odds. The storm outside raged on, but inside, warmth and life persisted. And in that fragile sanctuary, the human medic and the alien queen shared a quiet understanding. Together, they could face the frozen wasteland, the enemies who betrayed her, and the uncertain future that awaited them beyond the ice. The research station was quiet except for the soft hum of the heating units and the faint beeping of life monitors. Outside, the frozen planet continued to rage with storms, but inside, the atmosphere was calm and warm. Elias Kane had worked tirelessly to secure the Queen's safety, and for the first time, he allowed himself a moment to breathe. Melara lay on the reinforced medical bed, her massive form wrapped in multiple layers of thermal blankets, yet she no longer shivered as she had when he first found her. Her eyes opened slowly, taking in the soft light and the small human tending to her. Elias smiled faintly and adjusted the warming units, ensuring her body temperature remained steady. "You're doing better," he said softly. "Your body is responding well. You're going to be fine." Though she could not speak words in a language he understood, the telepathic pulses he felt were stronger, more focused. He could sense her awareness of him, and perhaps even a form of gratitude. The Queen's injuries were still serious, but they were manageable with the station's equipment. Elias had spent hours examining alien physiology manuals stored on the station, adapting the advanced medical tools to her unique biology. He worked with a steady hand, administering regenerative fluids through specially designed injectors, carefully monitoring the reactions. Melara's breathing grew even, and the faint glow of energy running through her body strengthened. Elias allowed himself a small smile. She was healing. As she regained strength, Melara began to communicate more clearly. At first, it was only flickers of emotion and images, brief flashes of memories and intent. Elias learned to interpret the subtle signals, images of her people, her empire, and the betrayal that had left her stranded on the frozen wasteland. He understood the depth of her suffering, the isolation, and the despair she had endured, and yet, despite all that, she had survived. Elias sat beside her bed, speaking softly. "You've been abandoned, yes, but I'm here now. You won't be alone anymore." He could feel her response in the pulse of thought and emotion that flowed toward him. It was cautious, hesitant, but it carried the beginnings of trust. It was remarkable, an intelligent, powerful being, learning to rely on a human. He felt the weight of responsibility, but also the exhilaration of achieving something extraordinary. For days, Elias continued the careful routine of monitoring, treatment, and observation. He adjusted the temperature in the room, stabilized her heart rate, and administered small doses of regenerative compounds. Melara, slowly but surely, began to regain her strength. Her eyes shone brighter, her breathing became more regular, and she even attempted small movements of her wings and limbs. Each time, Elias encouraged her, careful not to push too hard. She was powerful but fragile from the trauma she had endured. As she strengthened, her mental presence grew more distinct. She began to send him images of her world, flashes of cities and landscapes, her people, and glimpses of battles that had shaped her life. Elias absorbed the information carefully, using it to understand her needs, motivations, and fears. He realized that the betrayal that had left her stranded was more than personal, it was political. She had been a leader, a symbol of authority, and yet her enemies had turned against her, leaving her to die. Elias could not help but admire her resilience. Despite the pain, the betrayal, and the near-death experience, she remained intelligent, alert, and strategic. Her species had long lifespans, and she carried the wisdom of decades. And yet she had never encountered a human like Elias, small, fragile by comparison, yet capable of courage, intelligence, and empathy. He realized that this unique combination of traits was part of what had allowed her to survive this ordeal. Over time, a subtle bond developed between them. It was not based on language, rank, or even species. It was based on mutual recognition of skill, trust, and determination. Melara seemed to sense Elias' unwavering commitment, and he, in turn, recognized her intelligence and willpower. Together, they created a silent partnership, each aware of the other's strengths and vulnerabilities. Elias began to help her plan the next steps. The research station provided safety and medical care, but it was isolated. Supplies were limited, and hostile forces that had betrayed her could still be tracking her energy signature. They needed a strategy, a way to regain influence and protect her people from further harm. Melara communicated fragments of her plans through images and emotions, and Elias interpreted them, offering human perspectives that often focused on practicality, adaptation, and creative problem-solving. Through these sessions, Melara began to understand humanity in a new way. She had known humans before as distant allies or opponents, but she had never encountered one who displayed such patience, resilience, and moral courage. Elias did not rely on brute strength or intimidation. He relied on intelligence, empathy, and careful action. These were qualities she admired, though she did not fully understand how to categorize them within her own experience. One evening, as the storm outside raged more fiercely than ever, Elias reviewed the station's communications logs. There were faint signals indicating activity from her enemies, suggesting that they were still searching for her. The news was unsettling, but Elias remained calm. "They may come," he said, "but we are ready. We will not be caught unprepared." Melara responded with a mental pulse that carried determination, a recognition that her survival was now tied to his guidance and the strategies they could develop together. Over the next several days, Elias worked to strengthen both the Queen and their defenses. He reinforced the station's shields, set up sensor arrays to detect approaching threats, and stockpiled food, water, and medical supplies. Each task required careful planning, precision, and endurance, but he handled them with calm focus. Melara observed, learning from his methods, and occasionally contributed insights based on her strategic experience. Their partnership was growing stronger, a blend of alien intelligence and human ingenuity. During one quiet moment, Melara reached out with her thoughts again, more clearly than before. This time, she communicated an image of her home planet, showing him the cities, the architecture, and the people she had once led. Elias absorbed the information, realizing the scale of what she had lost and what could be restored. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that their work could have far-reaching consequences. Elias spent hours discussing strategies with her, using a combination of telepathic understanding and spoken language. He offered ideas on resource management, navigation, and diplomacy. Melara, in turn, provided insights into political structures, cultural norms, and tactical advantages. Though their communication was not traditional, it was effective. Together, they began to form a plan that balanced her experience as a leader with his perspective as a human trained in improvisation and problem-solving. As Melara regained strength, her body healed further and her energy signature returned to a healthy, steady state. She began to move more confidently, testing her wings, stretching her limbs, and even standing for brief periods. Elias assisted her, offering guidance and support, but he allowed her to regain autonomy. Watching her recover, he felt pride and relief. She had survived the frozen wasteland, and now she was preparing to reclaim her strength, her influence, and her life. Despite their progress, the threat of her enemies remained. Elias knew that their journey was far from over. Any misstep could expose them to danger, and the frozen planet outside offered little protection against determined pursuers. But he also knew that Melara was no longer helpless. She had recovered enough to act, to strategize, and to participate in her own defense. Their partnership had grown into something formidable, a blend of human resilience and alien authority that was capable of facing the challenges ahead. One morning, as the storm subsided slightly, Elias and Melara began to explore the station more thoroughly. They discovered additional supplies, maintenance systems, and tools that could aid their journey. Melara communicated details about how her enemies might approach, potential weaknesses in their search patterns, and strategies for evasion. Elias integrated this information with his knowledge of human tactics, creating a plan that balanced caution with decisive action. The two worked side by side, each learning from the other. Elias gained insight into her species, capabilities, social structures, and tactics, while Melara observed his adaptability, creativity, and unwavering focus. Together, they formed a bond built on mutual respect, trust, and shared purpose. The queen, once abandoned and weakened, was becoming whole again, not just in body, but in mind and spirit. By the end of the week, Melara was strong enough to participate more actively in her recovery and planning. Elias had stabilized her condition, secured the station, and prepared for the next stage of their journey. Outside, the storm continued to rage, a reminder of the harsh environment they had survived. But inside, they had achieved something extraordinary: safety, recovery, and the beginnings of a partnership that could challenge even the most formidable enemies. Elias looked at Melara, standing tall now, her presence commanding even in the small, enclosed space of the station. She regarded him with a mixture of respect and acknowledgement, a recognition of his courage, skill, and humanity. He felt a quiet satisfaction. They had survived the frozen wasteland together, built trust, and begun to forge a plan for the future. As the sun broke through the storm clouds, casting pale light across the icy landscape, Elias knew that their journey was far from over. The enemies who had abandoned Melara were still out there, the galaxy remained dangerous, and the Queen's people still needed her. But for now, they had achieved something remarkable: survival, trust, and the beginnings of hope. And in that hope lay the promise of strength, recovery, and the extraordinary power of human courage in the face of impossible odds. The storm outside had finally begun to ease, leaving the frozen plains glistening under pale sunlight. The wind still whispered through the jagged ice cliffs, but inside the small research station, a sense of purpose replaced the long-held tension. Doctor. Elias Kane stood beside Queen Melara, whose body had fully recovered, her energy steady, and her mind sharp. The Queen's eyes, violet and penetrating, reflected a mixture of resolve and trust. Together, they had survived the frozen wasteland, built a fragile but unbreakable bond, and now faced the task that had begun the moment Elias found her: reclaiming her position, protecting her people, and confronting the enemies who had abandoned her. Elias checked the station's sensors one last time, reviewing the faint signs of movement across the plains. Scouts from her enemies were still out there searching, but their signals were weak. She had allies, yes, but many had been scattered or demoralized after the betrayal that left her stranded. Elias and Melara needed a strategy that would not rely solely on force, but on intelligence, adaptability, and the careful use of the environment. "Are you ready?" Elias asked softly. He had spent days studying her people's tactical maps, combining her knowledge with his understanding of terrain, weather, and human ingenuity. Melara responded with a pulse of mental energy, focused, sharp, and clear. She was ready. They left the station carefully, moving across the snow with stealth and precision. Elias guided her through hidden valleys and behind ice ridges, minimizing exposure to enemy sensors. Melara moved with surprising agility for her size, her wings tucked to conserve energy and avoid detection. Elias marveled at her resilience. The queen who had once been left to die now moved with purpose and strength, a living testament to survival. Hours into their journey, they reached the edge of a frozen canyon that overlooked a small encampment. This was the heart of the hostile forces, soldiers and scavengers who had played a role in Melara's abandonment. Elias crouched beside her, pointing to weak points in the terrain. "The guards change positions every few minutes. We can use the narrow ice bridge on the left. It's risky, but it gives us cover." Elias respected her intelligence, but he also realized something extraordinary. She had begun to rely on him not out of necessity alone, but because she understood the value of his perspective. The crossing was tense. The ice bridge was thin, slick, and treacherous. One slip could send them plummeting into the canyon below. Ilias led carefully, testing each step before moving, guiding Melara across. Her wings flexed slightly, keeping balance, and her enormous form moved with surprising grace. They reached the other side without incident, though the strain was evident in their muscles and endurance. From this vantage point, Ilias surveyed the enemy camp. They were numerous but disorganized, their patrols inconsistent. He whispered a plan to Melara, using both words and images she could interpret mentally. "We disable the power generator first," he explained. "It will throw their communication off. Then we create confusion, giving your loyalists a chance to reclaim positions." They were ready. They descended slowly, moving through snowdrifts and behind natural cover until they reached the perimeter of the encampment. Ilias set small, portable devices to create interference, cutting off communications. The soldiers inside panicked, unsure of what had disrupted their systems. It was the first advantage in a battle they could not win through strength alone. Melara emerged from the shadows, her wings spreading briefly in a display of power. The soldiers froze, stunned by the sudden appearance of the queen they had abandoned. Ilias watched closely, ready to act, but she did not attack indiscriminately. Her presence alone, combined with the disruption Ilias had caused, created a psychological edge. Fear, hesitation, and awe rippled through the camp. Ilias moved alongside her, guiding her to key positions. Using knowledge of their patrol patterns, he directed Melara's loyalists, those who had remained hidden or loyal despite the chaos, to strategic locations. The enemy was confused, disoriented, and increasingly vulnerable. Ilias continued to provide real-time advice, suggesting flanking paths, cover points, and timing strategies. The battle that followed was swift and decisive. Melara led with authority, her presence commanding, her movements precise. She used her size, strength, and intelligence to reclaim control, while Ilias supported her with tactics, planning, and adaptability. Each step of the way, he anticipated movements, spotted vulnerabilities, and communicated with her through words and thought. It was a partnership, a blend of human ingenuity and alien authority, and it proved unstoppable. By the end of the confrontation, the hostile forces were scattered, their leaders captured or retreating into the distance. Melara stood tall amidst the chaos, her body unscathed, her energy strong. Ilias approached her, exhausted but exhilarated. "You did it," he said softly. "We did it." Melara, a queen once abandoned, now reclaimed her authority, not through brute force alone, but through a combination of strategy, resilience, and trust in an unexpected ally. The victory was not only tactical but symbolic. The queen's people, witnessing her return and the success of her mission, began to rally. The story of her survival and Ilias' role spread quickly, transforming human presence from a distant curiosity to a trusted and respected ally. Humanity, through courage, intelligence, and moral integrity, had proven its worth in the galaxy. Ilias and Melara spent the following days consolidating her regained influence. Ilias helped coordinate logistics, communication, and planning. Melara, though powerful and wise, relied on his perspective to see opportunities and anticipate challenges from outside her species, usual methods. Together, they restored stability to her people, creating a new alliance built on respect and trust. During one quiet evening, as the sun dipped behind distant ice cliffs, Melara approached Ilias. She communicated a sense of gratitude, not only for saving her life, but for demonstrating qualities her species often overlooked: empathy, patience, courage, and intelligence. Ilias, in turn, expressed his admiration for her resilience, leadership, and wisdom. They shared a mutual acknowledgement of the bond they had formed, one that transcended language and species. The frozen planet, once a symbol of danger and near death, now stood as a testament to survival, ingenuity, and the unexpected power of trust. The storm had subsided, revealing vast plains of ice that sparkled in the fading light. It was a world that had tested them, yet they had emerged victorious, not only in reclaiming territory, but in proving the enduring strength of life and collaboration. Ilias reflected on their journey. From the moment he had found Melara, abandoned and on the brink of death, he had relied on skill, determination, and compassion. Every decision, every careful action, every risk had been a choice to protect life and uphold integrity. And in doing so, he had not only saved a queen, but had reshaped the perception of humanity in a distant corner of the galaxy. Melara, now fully recovered, led her people with renewed strength and clarity. She had survived betrayal, endured harsh environments, and witnessed firsthand the value of human courage and intelligence. Elias had proven that even those considered small or fragile could change the course of history through determination, creativity, and moral courage. Together, they had demonstrated a fundamental truth. Greatness was not defined solely by physical power, resources, or history, but by the willingness to act, to protect, and to stand for what was right. Humanity, in its unique combination of intelligence, empathy, and courage, had earned respect in the galaxy through deeds rather than words. As night fell, Elias stood beside Melara on a high plateau overlooking the icy plains. The wind was calm, the stars glimmering across the vast sky. The Queen's energy radiated steadily, and her people were safe. He felt a profound sense of fulfillment and purpose. "You've changed their minds," Melara communicated mentally, the thought clear and deliberate. "They see humanity differently now. They trust you and they respect you." The Queen's enemies had been defeated, her authority restored, and her people inspired. Humanity had been shown as a force not merely of technology or numbers, but of ingenuity, morality, and bravery. Elias Kane, a human medic, had proven that even one person could make a difference when guided by integrity and courage. Melara turned to him, her violet eyes reflecting the starlight and the rising hope of her people. For a moment, words were unnecessary. The bond they had forged spoke louder than any language, stronger than any alliance, and more enduring than any conflict. In the frozen wasteland where life had seemed impossible, they had survived. They had overcome betrayal, danger, and the harshness of nature. And in doing so, they had built something extraordinary, a partnership between species, a story of courage and ingenuity, and a testament to the enduring strength of humanity. Elias knew that this was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast, full of challenges and mysteries, but he had proven his worth and, more importantly, the potential of humans to rise above expectations. Together with Melara, he would face whatever came next, knowing that the bond they shared, and the courage, intelligence, and empathy they represented, would guide them through anything the universe could throw at them. For the first time in days, Elias allowed himself to relax. The frozen planet, once a symbol of death and despair, now reflected triumph and hope. Life, resilience, and courage had prevailed. Humanity had proven its value, and the alien queen's trust in him had created a lasting connection that would shape the future. And so, under the endless stars, the human medic and the alien queen stood side by side, ready to face the galaxy together, united by trust, courage, and the extraordinary power of survival.